Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into two huge environmental conflicts happening in India right now. And even though they're in completely different parts of the country, they tell the exact same powerful story about the clash between development and nature.
Okay, let's get right into it. We're starting with these incredibly strong words from India's Supreme Court. This isn't just some dry legal statement, you know? This is basically a shot across the bow in a massive fight over one of the country's most important ecosystems. So our story has two main characters, two very different landscapes that are both absolutely critical. On one hand, you've got the ancient Aravalli Mountains, this rugged old range that's literally a wall stopping the Thar Desert from swallowing up more of the country. And on the other, the remote Nicobar Islands, a tropical paradise that's also one of the planet's most important hotspots for biodiversity. So first, let's head to the Aravallis. There's a plan for a big new zoo safari here that's been stopped dead in its tracks by the Supreme Court. But this isn't really about a zoo. It's about something much, much bigger. You see, the real problem, the core of this whole thing, is what even is an Aravalli Hill? For years, nobody could really agree on a definition, and that ambiguity has been a huge problem for everything from conservation to mining. So now, the court has finally drawn a line in the sand. So, in late 2025, to try and fix this mess, the court started looking at this new definition from a government committee. And it sounds pretty scientific, right? 100 meters or more. The goal was to create one clear, objective rule you could use everywhere to decide what gets protected and what doesn't. Okay, but here's the catch. That 90%? That's how much of the Aravalli landscape critics and even an internal government survey say could be left unprotected by this new rule. They're warning that if you only protect the peaks over 100 meters, you're ignoring all the foothills, the valleys, the slopes, basically 90% of the ecosystem that makes the whole thing work. So you've basically got two totally opposing views here. The government says, hey, this brings clarity, it helps us stop illegal mining, and we can protect the most important parts. But environmentalists are saying, whoa, hold on. This isn't a scientific rule. It's a loophole that could open the floodgates for mining and construction across vast areas we thought were safe. And here's the real kicker. You gotta read the fine print. Even with these new rules, there's a huge proposed exception. Mining for so-called critical minerals, things like lithium, rare earths, stuff for defense, might still be allowed. And it's all justified under the banner of national security. Now remember that phrase, strategic importance. It's gonna come up again. Okay. Let's jump thousands of kilometers away to the Bay of Bengal, where the exact same playbook is being used, centered on that very same idea of strategic need, but on an even more massive scale. Get a load of this number, 72,000 crore rupees. That is the massive price tag for something called the Great Nicobar Project, a plan that is designed to completely reshape this pristine remote island. And this isn't just a small development. I mean, look at this. We're talking about a whole new world being built here. An international port, an airport, a whole township, a power plant, the works. And to do all that, they'd have to clear a massive chunk of dense, ancient rainforest, a lot of which is ancestral land for indigenous tribes who've lived there for centuries. And what's the reason for all this? Well, there's that phrase again. The government's argument is basically singular and powerful. This project is of strategic importance. It's being framed as absolutely essential for India's trade and its military presence in the Indian Ocean. But, as you can imagine, not everyone is on board. You have fierce opposition from two different fronts. On one side, you have the indigenous communities, the Nicobaris, who say they're being pressured to give up their land without being properly consulted. And on the other side, you've got scientists and environmental experts screaming from the rooftops about irreversible damage to coral reefs, rainforests, and the nesting sites of endangered species like the giant leatherback turtle. And then came the big decision. The country's top environmental court, the National Green Tribunal, actually gave it the go-ahead. They said the project has adequate safeguards. It was a decision that, as you can guess, activists were just floored by. They argue the true ecological and social costs are being completely ignored. So, okay, let's step back for a second. You put these two stories together, Aravalli and Nicobar, and you start to see a pattern, right? It's like there's a playbook for how to push these controversial projects through. I mean, check it out. Step 1, pitch a huge project and slap that strategic importance label on it. Step 2, when the lawsuits from local communities and green groups start flying, you move to Step 3.
You just change the rules. You literally redefine what a hill is. And finally, step 4, you push it through by saying, sorry, but the national interest is more important. It's the same story, just different locations. You use national security as a trump card. You bend the rules to fit your project. You push aside local voices. And basically, you put economic goals way ahead of any ecological red flags. These are the threads connecting the dry mountains of the Aravallis to the rainforests of Great Nicobar. So that leads to a really big question, right? When all this destruction is seen as, necessary, how do they make up for it? What's the supposed trade-off?
Well, the main answer is something called compensatory afforestation. The logic is pretty straightforward. If you chop down a forest here, you have to pay money into a fund to plant a new one somewhere else, usually on some degraded land. Okay, but just look at the scale of this. It's just wild. The entire budget for planting new trees across all the Andaman and Nicobar Islands is less than 4 crore rupees. Now, compare that to the 72,000 crore rupee price tag for just this one project. It doesn't even compute. The compensation is just a drop in the ocean compared to the development.
So, what's the bottom line here? Look, as India races ahead with its big plans, these fights in the Aravallis and Nicobar are more than just local disputes. They're forcing a national conversation. They force us to ask, what kind of progress are we really chasing? What's the real price? And more importantly, is there anything we're not willing to sacrifice for it?